Imagine an ordinary school day. The corridors are quiet, but the tension is building. Our heroine is a young girl who has just faced a situation that has turned her world upside down. The principal, the very person that kids should trust, suddenly finds himself on the dark side, but he has no idea who is behind this girl. Her father is an FBI agent. Guys, this is a story about truth and justice, about how dark deeds always find an answer. While you're watching this video, please write in the comments where you're from and what your name is. It's very important for us to know who you are and that you're with us. Your support and engagement helps to promote our channel and share such important stories with you. Each of you is part of our team, and that makes us stronger. Thank you for being with us, for helping to bring light where it is needed. The school corridors, flooded with the cold light of fluorescent lamps, seemed to be drowning in a routine bustle. Students moved between classrooms, humming in the passages like streams of water in narrow channels, rushing from one door to the next. The school bell seemed to be the measure of time, counting down lessons and breaks like evenly sliced slices of the day. Outside, the day was just like any other. Teachers gave stern glances, shrill commands echoed off the walls, and in the classrooms, you could hear the rustle of notebooks and the voice of the teacher dictating. But someone attentive would have recognized something strange, unfamiliar. It was as if the air itself was electrified, saturated with tension, subtle but heavy, which sometimes made the students slow their steps and look over their shoulders. The teacher of the lower grades, with her lips pressed together, looked disapprovingly at those who passed her, as if she knew something, but kept silent, as if it were her hidden privilege. Somewhere at the far end of the corridor, almost invisible among the crowd, stood the headmaster, Mr. Hartman. His gaze was not like the others. He looked at the students as if through them, with something deeply personal and strange in his eyes. Nothing in his posture or mannerisms betrayed an inner tension, but one would have noticed that he was watching the students closely, especially some of them. There was something too intense in his gaze, evaluating, as if he was choosing whom to pay his special attention to. The bell for the next lesson sounded like a clap of thunder in the sky before the storm. The students quieted down and went to their classrooms, but the tension didn't disappear. It hung in the air, pressing and oppressive. The shadows grew deeper in the corners of the corridors, and the movement around them took on a jagged, confused rhythm. Everything went on as usual, but something was subtly changing, as if someone was secretly directing these events, preparing for something much bigger than a normal school day. Mr. Hartman was known around the school as a model principal, someone who always knew what to say and how to impress. At school assemblies, he liked to talk about family values and equality, assuring parents that every child in his school was safe and cared for. He was always present at major school events, smiling, level-headed, full of confidence, as if he was the one keeping the world around him from falling apart. Parents trusted him. Teachers respected him at first glance. It seemed that he could be trusted with any questions or difficulties. But behind that flawless exterior there was another Hartman, a man with a cold and hard nature. His students, especially those who were a little different from the others, had long ago sensed this hidden side of him. It was enough for one student to make the slightest mistake, as Hartman became unforgiving. His stern, cold eyes were easily threatening, and beneath his fixed mask of a smile lurked an unconcealed cruelty. He looked down on his students, holding them in constant fear and humiliation, as if they were nothing more than pawns in his game. At a meeting with parents, he could talk confidently about support and equality, but behind the scenes, his rules were different. He was particularly harsh on those students who stood out because of their appearance or background. His rejection was especially evident with students of color, and especially with those who caused him irritation simply by their existence. His behavior remained hidden from the eyes of most, but those who once encountered his power remembered it forever. There were stories of Hartman brutally humiliating students right in his office. They were summoned there for the slightest misdemeanor, and behind closed doors he gave free rein to his harsh, demeaning attitude. It was rumored that his disciplinary methods went beyond the usual reprimands. Students who had been to him came out with drooping heads and no longer tried to speak out or object. Under his gaze, children lost confidence, as if he were sucking the last drops of self-esteem out of them. But no one could accuse him openly. In public, he remained an exemplary headmaster, even a friend of the school, and everything that went on behind his closed door was hidden in the shadows, just like him. It was an ordinary day for Leila, who had known since first grade that school was not always a friendly place for her, but she tried to be inconspicuous, to study harder than others, to avoid the suspicious glances of some teachers. Her father taught her patience and strength, and her mother taught her to be proud of herself. This day, however, was special. When she received the note ordering her to report to the principal's office, her insides clenched. Leila didn't know what she'd done wrong, but her instincts told her it was going to be a tough conversation. She walked down the long, empty hallway, hearing only the thudding footsteps that echoed off the walls. As if time were slowing down, stopped in front of the heavy door with the director's sign. She sighed, knocked, and entered. Mr. Hartman sat at his massive desk, head bowed and staring at her intently. He didn't even invite her to sit down, only indicated her seat in front of the desk with a gesture that was more like an order than a courtesy. His gaze was cold, like it was burning to her. Leila, you must have some idea why you're here, he began, his voice calm, but in that calmness it sounded threatening. No, to her, she replied, trying not to show the fear that clutched her chest. He grinned, but there was no kindness in his grin. He leaned forward with his hands on his head, his voice lowered to almost a whisper, as if he were telling her something forbidden. You know, Leila, that this school has certain rules of behavior, and I expect every student to abide by them, he said, emphasizing the last word. But some people feel that the rules can be changed for them. Apparently, people like you don't understand boundaries. Her heart clenched. His words were simple, but behind them was a tone of contempt. She felt her cheeks begin to burn. He spoke to her as if she were someone beneath him, something not worthy of respect. Ew, he paused, leaning even closer. You know you should be thanking this school for allowing you to study here at all. Leila clenched her fists, trying to hold back the tears that came to her eyes. But he continued, savoring every word, every humiliation he threw in her face. He stared down at her, fully aware of his power, and it was clear to her that this wasn't just a remark, it was a planned humiliation, aimed at destroying her from the inside out. And if you think you can stand out here, where everything is strictly by the book, you're wrong, girl, he said, emphasizing the word girl as if it were a swear word. Your outlook on life, your habits, nobody wants them here. You have to fit in, or you don't belong here. She felt something inside her break. His voice was calm, but his every gesture, his every look said that he was using the power to make her feel insignificant. In this school, where she had been taught the value of knowledge, she was confronted with what seemed monstrous and terrifying. It became clear to her that behind the outward facade of equality and support, there was a bitter and terrible reality, and that the man who should be trusted by the students was using his position to suppress and humiliate. When she left the office, she had only one wish: to get out of here, away from the stares that penetrated her, away from the words that tore at her soul. She already knew this conversation would change her forever, but she couldn't have imagined how much her father would be willing to protect her. When Leila returned to class that day, she couldn't concentrate. The principal's words, His scornful glances and his icy tone kept her in her head. She felt insignificant, as if her value had been reduced to nothing. Every glance she caught seemed judgmental. Every word the teacher said sounded distant, as if against a backdrop of burning pain and resentment. But she had no idea that this was only a prelude to what would happen later. The next day, in the middle of class, she was called to the principal's office again. The loudspeaker bell rang unexpectedly, and the entire class's attention was on her. She walked down the still empty hallway and stopped at the door, trying to collect her thoughts and suppress the fear that lodged in her throat. When she entered, Principal Hartman stood at the window with his hands behind his back, as if he were thinking about something serious. He didn't even turn to look at her, just threw a cold, "Close the door." Leila obeyed, but she was overcome with the feeling that this encounter would be even more brutal than the last. "Leila, come here," he said, finally turning to her. His face showed no emotion, as if he were ready to say or do something ordinary or routine. She walked over, trying not to look him in the eye, not to provoke him, but when she was close enough, he did something unexpected. The director stepped close to her, almost violating her personal space, and put his hand on her shoulder. The touch was cold, overwhelming, and clearly intentional. He looked down at her, and there was no more hint of pedagogical concern in his gaze, just power, just power. "Look, girl," he said, not letting go of her shoulder, but now his hand slid a little lower, and Leila instinctively recoiled. "You're not here to put yourself for your ideas. You're here because you're allowed to be. Understand?" She nodded, feeling panic overwhelm her when his hand lingered a little longer than propriety would allow. Everything in her body screamed, but her voice wouldn't find its way out. "Look at me," he commanded, squeezing her shoulder harder. Her eyes, full of horror, rose to his face. There was not a shadow of sympathy in it, only icy hardness, and perhaps even a shadow of pleasure at her helplessness. She suddenly felt trapped, like a hunted animal facing a predator. Her hands trembled, but she couldn't even take a step back. "You remember who's in charge," he whispered almost in her ear, and then let her go, leaving her standing there, exhausted and humiliated. It seemed he was fully convinced that he had broken her. She stood before him as if lost, her heart breaking with humiliation and disgust. But she couldn't say a word. When she finally ran out of his office, she felt like she'd left a part of herself there, in the dark room, next to his cold, hateful gaze. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she tried not to notice them. It seemed to her that her world, everything she knew, had crumbled, and her trust in school, in adults, in justice, had vanished without a trace. That moment left a deep scar in her soul that she didn't realize yet, but that had already changed her forever. Leila came home in silence, her footsteps echoing in the dark hallway of their apartment. Her mother noticed her at once, the pale face, the trembling hands, the eyes full of unutterable pain and despair. She ran to her daughter, but Leila couldn't get a word out, just stood there, hugging her mother and holding back tears. Her father, who was working on his computer in his office, looked out when he saw the commotion, and when he saw his daughter, he knew something serious had happened. Garrett Walker was more than just a caring father. As an FBI agent, he wasn't used to turning a blind eye to injustice and pain, especially when it concerned his family. He was characterized by a restrained and cold judgment that his colleagues could always rely on. But seeing his daughter's face, he felt everything inside clench with anger. As soon as Leila had struggled to explain what had happened in the principal's office, Garrett had realized it wasn't just misconduct. The principal didn't know who he'd messed with. No one at Leila's school knew her father was an FBI agent. Garrett had always kept his personal life in the shadows, preferring to keep his work private for the safety of his family. The school had only seen him as a polite but somewhat aloof parent who rarely came to meetings and confided in their mother Leila. But now, that late image of a genteel father was gone, giving way to the determination and fierce rage raging inside him. "Leila, I promise you," he said quietly, holding her hand, "this man will answer for everything he's done." The next day, Garrett didn't go to the office. He put on a strict suit and went to the school, determined to find out the whole story and, if necessary, use his resources to uncover the truth. But he didn't go there as just a father, he was an agent, coming to find out the details and set the record straight. When he entered Principal Hartman's office, he looked at him with surprise. The principal didn't know who was in front of him, just another parent he could cajole with pretty words or threats. He said the usual greeting, not realizing what consequences awaited him when Garrett introduced himself and began the conversation. "Director Hartman, I need to discuss the situation with my daughter, Leila Walker," Garrett said, his voice steady and cold. But behind the calmness was a rage held in check only by sheer force of will. "Leila," Hartman raised an eyebrow, pretending not to understand. "Oh, yes, that girl. A difficult case, but you know, it's important to maintain discipline in these situations. We're here to bring them up to speed." Garrett frowned, not allowing himself to give away his emotions. "Discipline? What about respect for students? What about respect for basic morals and ethics?" he asked, looking straight into Hartman's eyes. The principal felt slightly uncomfortable, but only for a moment. It seemed to him that he was dealing with another naive parent who simply didn't understand the complexities of schooling. He grinned, as if unintentionally. "You must understand, Mr. Walker," he said, "that I am here to establish order. A school is not a place to take liberties." "Does that mean you allow yourself to humiliate children?" Garrett asked, his tone colder. "We're using your position to show power, to make them feel powerless." Hartman frowned, feeling uneasy. He had not expected such boldness, such intransigence. "I don't know what your daughter told you, but I'm doing everything for her sake. She may have exaggerated a little," he said, but his voice was already shaking. Garrett, noticing this, leaned slightly to be at Hartman's eye level. "My daughter never exaggerates," he said, and the icy hardness of his voice made Hartman freeze. "And you will soon realize it." When Leila finally told her father the truth, she watched his face change, first to one of pain and then to one of anger. Cold and unrelenting, Garrett Walker was not just a father, but a man who had dedicated his life to protecting justice and keeping people safe. But nothing could have prepared him to hear of the humiliation and suffering his daughter, a child who had entrusted her life to the school and its leadership, had experienced. Leila recounted how the headmaster had used his position to intimidate and humiliate her. She struggled with every word, but Garrett listened without interrupting, though his face was a mask of tension and restrained rage. He was an agent, and he'd heard about injustice and seen the dark side of the world many times. But to hear about his own daughter falling victim to it was unbearable. His hands clenched into fists and his jaw tensed as Leila recounted Hartman's touch, his cold words and contemptuous tone. It wasn't just the desire for revenge that flared in his heart, but a determination to protect his daughter and prevent further abuse. At that moment, there were no more excuses for him. He knew that justice could not wait, that the punishment must be unavoidable and comprehensive. This situation was not just a matter of personal pain. For Garrett, it had become a matter of honor and principle. As an FBI agent, he had seen how such abuses could flourish in systems where power was used to suppress and humiliate rather than protect and support. But to allow this to happen to children, much less his own daughter, was for him an unforgivable sin he could not tolerate. Garrett swore to himself that Hartman would answer for everything. He had to find out if there were other children affected by the principal's actions, and how deep this hidden web of humiliation and abuse ran. For him, this became not just a matter of revenge, but a fight for safety and justice for every child in this school. He realized that he had the power and resources to pursue the truth and protect those who needed it. That night, Garrett sprang into action. He called his colleagues, enlisted the help of experts he knew, and began to investigate. Everything he heard from Leila became argument and evidence, and her pain and fear became the fuel that fueled his resolve. Garrett Walker plunged into the investigation, relying on the experience and connections he'd made during his years in the FBI. Now he wasn't just a father protecting his child, but a professional determined to get to the root of the problem and destroy the system from the inside. From the moment he got involved, the school system with its hidden rules and entrenched problems had been in the crosshairs of an agency that rarely missed his target. Garrett first requested access to school reports and documents that pertained to Principal Hartman. Using his authority, he began to review the school's disciplinary records for recent years. Soon a picture began to emerge before him that was even bleaker than he had realized. Among the many routine disciplinary records were cases where students, like Leila, had complained of humiliation, intimidation, and unfair treatment. The records, however, remained closed and almost forgotten, with no further investigations or even punishments. With the help of his colleagues in the Civil Rights Division, Garrett was able to find the parents of those children who had left the school under pressure and fear. The parents, hearing that Leila's father worked for the FBI and was going to get to the bottom of this, began to open up. It turned out that many of them had also tried to complain, but their appeals disappeared without a trace at the school administration level or were simply ignored. Over the years, Principal Hartman had developed a real mechanism of suppression and fear in the school, hiding any trace of his actions under the cover of discipline and maintaining order. Garrett also noticed a strange pattern. The vast majority of complaints came from families whose children were racially or culturally different. Shocking details began to emerge in the investigation about how Hartman was particularly cruel to students whose backgrounds didn't fit his idea of the right students. He did everything he could to parade them in front of others, humiliating them and depriving them of a sense of security. Thanks to the information gathered, Garrett contacted school staff members who may also have witnessed his actions. Several teachers, realizing that a serious investigation had begun against Hartman, agreed to speak anonymously about their experiences. They described how they were forced into silence for fear of losing their jobs or facing reprisals. One of them noted that the principal did not tolerate objections and could easily bring any uncomfortable teacher to the point of dismissal. These revelations revealed the systemic nature of the problem. Hartman was able to create an atmosphere of fear, suppression, and loyalty around him, using his connections and power as a cover. He controlled not only the students but also the teachers, confining everyone to a rigid framework that he alone obeyed. A school that was supposed to be a safe place for children turned out to be a place dominated by fear and impunity. Based on testimony and evidence, Garrett began to build a case against Hartman. It was not only testimony from children and parents, but also documents showing cover-ups, missing complaints, and years of neglect. His team built a dossier large enough to bring the case to the DA's office and bring attention to a school system where such abuses had long occurred. When the case finally took official form, Garrett knew he wasn't just fighting for his daughter. He was fighting for all those children and teachers who had been victimized by a system that covered up violence and prejudice. The day the truth about Principal Hartman came out was a shock to the entire school community. Garrett Walker and his team from the FBI and the prosecutor's office organized a meeting, inviting parents, teachers, and school district officials. There was tension in the room. No one really knew what was going to happen, but the muted rumors and recent talk of an investigation had already created an unsettling atmosphere. When Garrett took the floor, the room grew quiet. He calmly introduced himself as the father of one of the students, Leila Walker, and an FBI agent investigating egregious abuses of power and numerous instances of injustice and humiliation by Principal Hartman. He then began to read out the facts he had gathered, revealing one by one the ethical and moral violations. Parents sat in shock as they listened to Principal Hartman repeatedly humiliate students, especially those who differed in appearance, background, or behavior. Gary gave examples of Hartman forcing children into show discipline to demonstrate his power. He read testimonies from students who recounted their fear of the principal, his demeaning comments, and physical intimidation. Parents and teachers in the room looked on in astonishment as they realized that the man they had trusted for years had hidden deep cruelty and bias behind his mask of ostensible politeness. Garrett continued by reading testimony from teachers who had also been victims of pressure and threats from Hartman. They described how Hartman harassed those who tried to speak out against his methods, forcing them to remain silent on pain of dismissal. His methods had long been known in the inner circles of the school, but people were afraid to resist, knowing that their careers or students' futures could be destroyed by a single word from the principal. When Garrett got to the story of Leila and her humiliating encounter with Hartman, the hall was filled with indignation. Many parents couldn't hide their outrage. Their children had also complained about the principal, but until then, their words had been treated as mere school conflicts. Now the full picture of what kind of person Hartman was before them. Garrett's words were backed up by documents, photographs, records of complaints that were systematically ignored or destroyed. Each new piece of evidence shattered the image of a decent and caring principal that he had maintained for years. Soon the atmosphere in the hall became heated to the max. Parents began to indignantly demand answers, some of them wondering aloud how long the school authorities had turned a blind eye to these actions, and who else might have been aware. Leila's mother, watching, saw her husband make accusation after accusation, exposing Hartman to the entire community, defending their daughter and all those who had ever been hurt. It was the culmination of his struggle, the moment when the truth finally got a chance to be heard. Hartman, who was present at the meeting, initially tried to object and deny, but under the pressure of facts, evidence, and witnesses, his confidence and arrogance began to crumble. He still tried to pretend that the allegations were exaggerated, calling them misunderstandings and blaming difficult children, but his words were drowned out by the outraged voices. Finally, school district officials announced the suspension of the principal until a full investigation and legal action could be taken. Parents, angry and shocked, left the room, discussing the shocking facts among themselves. They realized that they had made a serious mistake by not listening to their children, not seeing the signs, and not questioning the principal's methods, and trusting him with their most precious possession, their children. The day was not just Hartman's unmasking, but a moment of realization for everyone in the school, the teachers and the parents. After Principal Hartman's public exposure, the case gained widespread publicity. The media picked up the story, drawing attention to the shocking details of his mistreatment of students and his abuse of power. Article after article, report after report, the truth about what was behind the school walls spread further and further, and the public demanded justice. Garrett Walker, along with FBI prosecutors and lawyers, finalized an indictment case based on numerous testimonies and documents. It was soon announced that Hartman would be arraigned on charges of violating children's rights, abuse of authority, and creating an environment that endangered the mental and physical health of students. Adding particular gravity to the charges was evidence of racially discriminatory actions. During the trial, more and more horrifying details emerged. Parents, students, and teachers testified, describing how Hartman used his position to humiliate, intimidate, and suppress those who did not meet his standards. Under the pressure of evidence and testimony, the charges expanded to also include withholding evidence and deleting complaints that had been made about his actions. During his years of service, the principal had accumulated many connections in the educational system, and some of these people tried to stand up for him, but the charges and evidence were too serious, and no one in the judicial system was willing to risk his reputation by standing up for Hartman. His connections, which had seemed like a solid defense, quickly crumbled, and he was left alone to face justice. The trial was difficult and lasted several weeks, but the final verdict was inexorable. Hartman was found guilty and sentenced to imprisonment for malicious violation of children's rights, abuse of authority, and discrimination. The court ordered him to pay substantial compensation to the affected families, as well as pay fines for his actions, which ended up completely ruining his financial situation. In addition, the judgment required a complete audit of the entire school system in which Hartman worked. His case became the starting point for reforms to protect students from such abuses. The district was forced to revise its policies and develop new, stringent measures to monitor the actions of administrators and staff to ensure that similar situations would not happen again. For Leila and her family, it was a moment of relief and justice. Garrett and his wife could finally exhale, knowing that their daughter and countless other children would no longer face the tyranny of a man the system had covered up for. They realized that their struggle had brought real change, not only for their family, but for the entire community. Hartman's case became a symbol of justice and determination, reminding everyone that abuse of power, no matter how hidden and pervasive it may seem, will not go unpunished. When Principal Hartman's story came to an end, it left a deep mark on the hearts of all who were involved. The events reminded the entire community how important safety, respect, and support are in schools. It was a lesson for everyone: parents, teachers, school administrators, and, of course, the children, who were now finally shown that they are not alone and that they have the right to be treated with respect. For Leila and her family, the struggle was a test of strength and unity. Garrett and his wife overcame bitterness, resentment, and anger to realize that their efforts had helped change not only their daughter's life, but the lives of many others. They now knew school should be a place where every child feels protected and respected, where adults are there to support and inspire, not to intimidate and suppress. Leila, after going through dark moments of fear and humiliation, found the strength to speak openly about it, to be an example to others who may face injustice. Her resilience has become a symbol for those who are not ready to accept oppression. It was a reminder to all parents that their support and attentiveness to their children makes a huge difference. Thanks to the support of her family, Leila was able to not only overcome her worries, but also to see how the truth was changing the world around her. This story was proof that when parents, schools, and communities come together to protect children, they are able to create safe spaces free from bias and cruelty. This was the beginning of a new chapter for the school and its administration, with measures in place to ensure that every member of staff is held accountable for their actions. The school has introduced programs to create a respectful and inclusive environment where all children can develop without fear of humiliation or harassment. The lesson taught by the story of Leila and her family helped everyone to realize the importance of openness and a willingness to confront evil, no matter how difficult the path to justice may seem. This story was a reminder of the importance of family, community, and every individual who is willing to fight injustice. It proved that change is possible when people are not left behind, when their voices are united in the pursuit of truth and respect. After all, every child deserves to feel safe and know that the world around them is filled with support and light. Friends, this story raises important questions about fairness, protection, and respect, especially in schools. Write in the comments what you think about this story. Have you or someone you love experienced injustice or discrimination in your life? Share your experiences. Your voice is important and can inspire others. Remember that each and every one of you is incredibly valuable to us. We are very grateful for your support and for discussing such important topics with us. Please subscribe to the channel and give us a like if this story touched you. We wish you a good day, and may every day bring only light and support.